Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning in to the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to episode 119, part B of APM Success. This is an episode that is following up to some prior content from episode 115. So you may remember the conversation around the non-compete, antitrust things happening in Washington with Bellingham Anesthesia Associates. After publishing that episode, I was fortunate to have a conversation with the president of that group, Dr. Scott Vanderleest. Dr. Vanderleest is joining us today to share a little bit more background and context about this circumstance that his practice had to navigate recently as it relates to employment agreements for their physicians, and is going to provide some really helpful color to allow us to understand the way forward for private groups of his profile. So, Dr. Vanderleest, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in here and present a little bit of the other side of the story, and appreciate your honesty in your first podcast, but then also your honesty in taking me as a guest.
Absolutely. I will say, after rereading some of the press release content around that, the consent decree and the agreement that you had reached with the AG, it was it was just very loaded sounding. And after having spoken with you, I know our listeners are going to enjoy hearing the other side of the story so that they can be informed about these things.
Yeah, thank you.
For starters, why don't you just give us a little context about your role in the group and a little bit about your career?
Sure. So Bellingham Anesthesia is a group of, we're around 50 anesthesiologists. We're a physician-only group that provides anesthesia care. For Bellingham is where we started, and then we've grown over the years, haven't changed our name. But we started in the 90s, and then kind of incorporated in the early 2000s, right around 2000. And at that time was 17 or 18 docs. And then over the course of several years to where we are now of up to 53. And we're an all physician group. We're all partners or on a partnership track. We are currently 2 years to partnership. So you come in as an associate with the expectation you'll become a partner within 2 years. And then we do have a couple 1099 employees. They're mostly former partners that have retired or semi-retired and want to do a little bit here or there, or willing to help us out a little bit here or there. And so they would be the only exception to the partnership track. We started serving St. Joseph's Hospital in Bellingham here. It's a Peace Health facility. And then in 2007, this was before my time with the group, we expanded to cover Skagit Valley Hospital down in Mount Vernon, which is the town just south of Bellingham, Washington. During that time, we also started with, in that time period, we've also started with several ASCs, and so now cover about 7 ASCs, and then two major hospitals. And then both those hospitals have smaller hospitals. So Peace Health has 2 other hospitals that are small critical access hospitals that we also cover. And then we started this last year covering another hospital in the Skagit Regional Health System at the next town south, which is the town of Arlington. So it's been organic growth all those years. Sites have grown. They've grown in their services they offer, and the number of ORs they have. The ASCs, new ASCs have been built, and we've kind of organically grown to cover those at those sites' requests. For my own personal story here, I grew up in Michigan, and then went to school in Michigan, joined the Army to help pay for med school, did my residency with the Army at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., and then some payback time in Central Texas at Fort Hood, including one free trip to Iraq, and then joined Bellingham Anesthesia in 2011 when the Army said I could go. And I've been here since then. I became the president 4 years ago. I'm in my 4th year, and that's where we kind of find ourselves as a group, and me personally.
What duties does being the president entail for a group like yours?
Yeah, so I oversee the hiring of new associates, oversee the contract negotiations we have with the hospitals or the ASCs, oversee those contracts we have with commercial payers. We think of ourselves as kind of a small business. So we have an administrative staff of one practice administrator, an office manager, and then another administrative assistant. But otherwise, we're all physicians. So we kind of light on top, and then we have outsourced some of our, billing and accounting and stuff like that. And so, small business, I have my fingers in just about everything to varying degrees, and pretty much anything's fair game to come across my desk.
Yeah, excellent. So talk a little bit about, what's happened the last few years, because in the podcast we referenced before, again, episode 115, anybody wants to check it out, apmsuccess.com/115. There's been this sort of macro trend of moving towards more permissive or employee-friendly employment agreements. And then there's the state-specific challenges or dynamics, I'll call them, as well. So talk about your experience of that in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so Washington State made some changes that you referenced in your prior podcast that went into effect in 2020 to the non-compete statutes. And BAA, since its beginning, had always had a 3-year non-compete for all physicians. So whether they were associates or partners, there was always that 3-year non-compete. In 2019, we adjusted our rules to become in compliance with that. So, as you referenced, the employed physicians, that in our case was associates, that is, people that were in the first 2 years of practice and not partners yet. We reduced that down to 18 months to be in compliance with the law. And then our 1099 employees, like I said, they're more retired and kind of fill in. So none of them met that income threshold of over $250,000. So we took the non-compete out of the 1099 contracts completely. We have an annual group meeting, official group meeting, where we discuss business matters. We discussed it pretty heavily at that time. The shareholder or partner non-compete, and our legal counsel, I think, advised us and sort of left it up to us at that stage. And so we discussed, if we wanted to change that at all. And I don't think there was really much desire to change it. We thought 3 years was fair. And so we left it at 3 years, and we felt we were in compliance with the statutes in Washington State that went into effect in 2020.
And so that was the time at which you're essentially taking proactive measures to try to get out in front of this this change in the rules. You made those changes, and then at some point, you received word from your friends in the state capitol that further action was going to be necessary. Talk about that.
Correct. So they, I believe it was in the spring of 2020, we received notice from the state attorney general that a complaint had been lodged against us for having an excessive share of the market and for having an overly broad and overly burdensome non-compete clause in our contracts. You can't, we can't know who or what entity filed that complaint with the state. It doesn't really matter. but anyways, they sent us a long, I believe it was 37 pages of questions. Provide these documents. What do you think about this? That it was fairly labor intensive, and we complied and did our best to work with them, and then we didn't hear from them for a fairly lengthy period of time, and I was sort of waiting for them to come back with follow-up questions, or I knew there was an investigation ongoing, so I assumed they were talking to business partners, be they hospital administrators, insurance company CEOs, ASC administrators, former partners. I figured all those were fair game, and but I didn't really have much visibility on that. And then I just figured our time would come. Well, our time didn't really come, and they served us with papers saying, we'll press charges unless you agree to these terms. And at that point, then we did have a meeting with them, a Zoom meeting, where we sort of argued our case. And I think it's a legitimate case. It's not. We can talk about this later on, but it wasn't just we don't like what you're saying, we want to keep doing things are. But I mean, we had legitimate reasons for why we had done things, and so then they ultimately came back and said, we would like you to reduce your non-competes to 9 months for associates and 12 months for partners, and then you may not have any exclusive agreements with ambulatory surgery centers, or as they call them, non-acute care facilities. We really had just 2 of those. Really, only one was very much what you might call a non-compete in the by most definitions. So we said, we're a small business. It's 2021. We've all been through this past year and a half of COVID. There's lots of stresses on us and our markets, and we can't really afford to take this into a courtroom and pay all the legal bills that could associate with that, even though we felt we had a pretty strong case. And if we didn't prevail in court, which is of course always that gamble, then the fees would be even higher. So we entered this consent decree. It's kind of like a plea agreement, where we don't admit any wrong. They don't have claim that we did anything wrong. They can allege whatever they want, but they don't claim that we did anything wrong. And then we agreed to their terms.
What was the consensus among your partners? Was it like, we just want to make this thing go away? Were there some who were like, let's go to the mattresses and
yeah,
that kind of thing?
I would say initially there were definitely some people, myself included, probably, that thought the claim was quite meritless, and we vehemently just disagreed with it and wanted to fight that. But I think after time went on, and we paid significant legal bills to get to the consent decree, and then they said, here's $110,000 fine, or pay our legal fees of $110,000 is what the consent decree said. I think at that point, it starts to be real money that we're all, as partners, foregoing.
Yeah.
And we didn't feel that the terms were that onerous, and felt like we'd rather settle rather than continue to pay these mounting legal bills.
Yeah. Tell me about the way that you perceive this, the newer, shorter, restriction for non-compete for your employees. Did you or any of your partners say this is going to be a real problem for us if there's only 9 months, or is it something where you're like, we don't really see this as a problem or an issue, and whether it's 9 months or 18 months or a year, it kind of is immaterial?
Right. I would say that
And here's why I'm asking, just for a little more color for
Yeah.
the listeners. Like, I was looking at this, and 12 months for a shareholder and 9 months for an employee was for any where a non-compete exists. That's like the shortest that I have seen. There are some companies
Right.
or some regions where they're unenforceable or that just don't use them. So that would be, I guess, an
Right.
exception. But curious your
Right.
thoughts on that.
Right. So I would say that I don't think that we think they're the death of our corporation. I think I'm struggling here a little bit because I think I need to back up, because I think you need to kind of say, well, why would you have a non-compete, right? I think there's
Sure.
many reasons for that. And not all of them I think are favorable, but I think some of them are favorable. So let me back up and talk about that a second, if that's okay with you.
Definitely.
So this is one of the things we argued to the Attorney General's office, is that there are pro-competitive effects of having a non-compete. And that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it's actually, there's it's not, and it's not, we didn't argue it cynically, trying to blow smoke into their face or something. This was a legitimate argument, and there's legal thought that supports this. That the non-compete helps us to function as a cohesive group. So we bring everybody in as full intention that they're going to become a partner within 2 years. We have a very, very good track record of that happening. I can't say it's 100%, because there have been occasions where, there just hasn't been a good personality fit, or people have had some issues or whatnot, but those are very, very rare. And so we bring people in with that full intent they're going to be partners. From day one, they start to get the same access to cases, to work, to call, for better and for worse. They're treated like partners, even though we don't call them a partner right away. They have that 2 years until they become a partner. But the reason that I think that works for us is because we're all a cohesive unit that functions with the same goal in mind. And we share, how our business practices. We share how much everybody in the group gets paid. We share what we collect from each site. Everybody knows our schedule for the week, where anybody's going. So we're very, very egalitarian, right? And I think that the non-compete allows us to not worry that somebody is being brought in, sort of giving the know-how of how the business might run, anywhere from payer contracts to productivity at different sites, to hospital contracts if they wanted a hospital contract. They can know all those details, and we can share that and help them. They can help us guide those, help put those things in place and grow a business. Versus if you don't have a non-compete, there's high variability in the production or the income that can be earned from different sites, right? The payer mix, the efficiencies, the volumes, all that stuff, and it's highly variable. And so, the workload can be variable, right? So hospitals come, of course, with call hours, holiday obligations, and weekend obligations that surgery centers do not. The payer mix typically is better at surgery centers. And so I think the worry is that you might bring in someone with nefarious intentions that comes in, learns your business, learns what is most lucrative, and then tries to make a better deal with one of those sites. And now you've lost a site that was one good business, but also allowed us to hire more folks to then which dilutes the amount of call we all have to take. So it makes for a better work environment for the group, which then benefits the community, because that's ultimately what the Attorney General is concerned about, because you're able to hire high quality folks that want to come in and be a part of that community. They're not locums that are just transiently passing through and aren't invested. But you have people that come in, they can, be part of this small business that we are, and learn the community and be high quality anesthesiologists that benefits the community. So that's why we had the non-compete, is to focus the group into a common mission, right? common mission of providing the best care that we can for our community, our fellow citizens, the people we live with in these communities. And so, we don't have these distractions of, oh, I saw so-and-so talking to so-and-so. I'm sure they're contriving something over there, right? So you have a cohesive mission. And so, when you look at that, then what do we think about the law or the shortening of those non-competes? I think people, anesthesiologists, physicians in general, I think most of them could probably stand to do locums, or perhaps not work even for a whole year, and then come and do that sort of behavior, even if they follow the law or the shortened non-compete. But it's all about hiring good folks and making it an attractive place to work within BAA, rather than kind of having those barriers up, if you will, which I think is a point you made in your first podcast, which I think we do. I think we've always tried to do that, right? That's why we're partners. That's why everybody's on that track. There's not different classes of folks. And, but, it's one less guardrail against that. But hopefully I don't perceive that as going to dramatically change it. I don't think it's devastating to the group. So it is what it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. One other thing I want to mention, when I said there's groups out there that have no non-compete, every case I can think of, there's still sort of the caveat that you can't do what you're doing at the same site where you're doing it. You might be able to walk across the street,
right,
another hospital or another site of service,
right,
but you can't, start doing anesthesia in a hospital where you're already doing it under your own incorporated.
Right.
So even
right.
a very employee-friendly contract with no, quote-unquote, no non-compete wouldn't allow you to do something like that.
Right.
So that all makes perfect sense, I think.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, so there's the other component, which was the contracts with the surgery centers and the allegations of monopoly, that you were like illegally, the only game in town and exerting effort to make it so that nobody else could ever break in. Talk a little bit about that dynamic and how you processed that portion of the consent agreement.
Right. I mean, well, one, I don't think we ever perceived it that way, and we didn't. I don't think we ever intended to act that way, that we had a monopoly on the market. We do have some geographic isolation up here, which is not unique to us in this country, but maybe is unique on the west side of this Washington state, right? We're not the Seattle market where one hospital here is covered by this group, and 2 miles down the road, there's another hospital covered by another anesthesia group. I mean, you do have to travel some distance. So I think by kind of geographic fluke, if you will, there was not a lot of competition here. But as I already said, there was the growth was organic. We looked, sites approached us, the hospitals, hey, we'd like to increase, the number of ORs or the number of out of OR cases we're doing. Can you help us with that? And of course we do. A couple of new ASCs have opened, and they approached us about, hey, we would love you guys to provide the anesthesia coverage. So, I don't think we ever perceived, and I don't think we ever attempted to act in a manner that tried to monopolize the market. And I'd say that for anesthesia, the market is certainly national. There's national staffing firms that. I just last week I heard from two ASC administrators that they had been contacted by a national firm saying, hey, we just checking in, making sure you're happy with your anesthesia coverage. They don't have a foothold here, but they're certainly looking for it, and they're certainly would be capable of providing a proposal to provide that coverage. So, I think we've always felt that there is competition, even if there hasn't been actually that much of a footprint of a larger group here in the same town. And I should also point out that we work alongside, particularly nurse anesthetists. We've always worked alongside a certain number of nurse anesthetists at a couple of the ASCs. That's been long-standing. And now we work alongside some of our former partners at one of the multi-specialty ASCs. So, there are in fact competitors in the market up here.
Another one of the catch-22s here is, obviously, if I'm you, I'm a business owner. I want to not only protect the relationships that I have, but I want to do everything I can to make sure that the hospitals love me and that we're well integrated in leadership and perioperative observation and the OR operations and the critical care and all of that. And that is going to necessarily, it could be perceived as anti-competitive, I suppose.
Right. There's two aspects there, right? One, yes, you certainly want to be integrated in the hospital. That's a common anesthesia business practice, right? That comes from the ASA with the perioperative home, right? That's one of their selling points. But it's also benefits us to be involved, to help provide that expert knowledge and expert insight that we have, right? Yeah. So, I mean, being a perioperative consultation service is benefits us to have healthier patients or more prepared patients coming to the OR and patients with better outcomes, and that benefits the hospital, right? I think that's why the Attorney General saw the benefit and allowed those exclusive agreements with the hospitals to stay, because they see that benefit that an anesthesia group providing comprehensive anesthesia coverage benefits the hospitals and benefits ultimately then patients, right?
Right. And so the consent agreement resulted in and maybe just clarify for me, they were the ASCs and the hospitals were bundled together under the prior contract, and the consent agreement sort of severed that connection. So now the surgery centers can bargain on their own if they want to.
Oh, no, the surgery centers have always been independent. The hospital doesn't. None of the hospitals that we work at have an ASC associated with them. So they've always been independent. Then they're all surgeon owned. Two of the multi-specialty ones have some outside interest as well, but they're all surgeon owned, and they've always had their own contract. I mean, we have a contract with all the ASCs, we will provide anesthesia coverage for you. It's just two of them will be the exclusive provider of anesthesia for you.
Got it.
And, I would point out that those two sites were agreeable and have seen their own advantages to having that. And the consent decree allows them to continue if they see benefit to it. The consent decree just doesn't allow us to enforce the non-compete from our end.
Got it.
But if the surgery centers see there's benefit to it, and by benefit, I mean, I think, one, it's a little simpler to just have one anesthesia group covering all your cases. And two, they do sometimes exert that as, we provide all your anesthesia. Well, we need more anesthesia, so you need to provide it. That's the other side of the exclusive agreement.
Right.
I mean, that's what hospitals do too, right?
Sure.
So yeah, the ASC agreements were always separate.
Got it. And wrapping up here, is there anything looking back that you kind of wish that you had done differently or had known, or that if there's anyone else out there listening who's a practice leader and trying to sort of get ahead of things a little bit, that you would encourage them to think about?
Right. And I've actually had these conversations with other regional practice people have called me up and said, hey, how do we not get into this? So I think you pointed this out on your first podcast. I do think the Attorney General was looking for a test case, if you will. And actually, I think this is a little bit of go inside their mind, but I do think that I think that the monopoly argument was, a little bit weak, I think, but I think that it helped them to justify bringing that non-compete portion shorter than what even the legislature had allowed, right? So there's no disagreement that what we ended up agreeing to with them is more restrictive on us as a corporation than it is on the average, than what the legislature seemed to intend.
Yeah.
So so I think that we unfortunately were sort of a test case that the AG was looking for. And so I think that that's consistent with, kind of regionally what's happened here. I know I can't speak to Oregon where you are so much, but in Washington, certainly there's been a push to limit this, as evidenced by the legislature making this new law in 2020, or it went in effect in 2020. And then, of course, President Biden weighed in on it earlier this year. Yeah. And so I think there's a tailwind for legislature or attorneys general to pursue these sorts of things. And so in that sense, I think it was a somewhat wrong place, wrong time, bad luck for us. That said, I think I wish we would have been a little bit more aggressive in cutting down that non-compete for our shareholders. I think as I've been talking to people regionally, I think most groups did cut it down to 2 years or 18 months for shareholders. So I think we were a bit of an outlier with keeping ours at 3 years. But that's a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking there. Yeah. Other than that, our growth was organic. I'm not sure, are you supposed to pass up on business? Why would we pass up on business? We are a business trying to grow business. Did we ever engage in business practices, that would hurt consumers or hurt patients as consumers? We never did that. I can say that in full honesty and good faith, clear conscience. There's national firms that look to go out of network to drive their rates up. It was never our practice. We always, strive for consistency with what the region is getting, and that's all. We're not that far from Seattle, and yet we can only get a percentage of what the rates are there. I think that the insurance companies have a lot of power in setting their rates. I think I can tell you how much power I think I have whenever those negotiations come up. They seem to be, this is our rates, you should take this or not. But right. There's not a lot of negotiation there that goes on. There's a little bit, but it's nibbling on the edges. Yeah. So what could you have done differently? I like I said, the one thing I would identify is I wish we had cut down our non-competes to 18 months. But other than that, these things happen occasionally, and unfortunately, they get settled in the court, and or out of court because you can't afford to pay the legal bills. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we'll wrap. Any other parting words of wisdom, Dr. Vanderleest, before I let you go? I just would like to say, when I was listening to your the first part too, I would draw a distinction between a shareholder, a situation, a partnership like we have, where essentially everybody is a partner or is, will be in short order, versus those firms that are nationally owned by larger firms, or where there's a small cohort of owners and then a number of employees. And I think that makes a distinction. That's where I think that's a different business model. I think that the motivations for non-competes may be different in those models. I think the beneficiaries are different. In this case, this was really, we were trying to benefit all partners and keep everybody on that equilibrium. Right. And so I would just point out that distinction, because I think in generally I would be more in favor, and I probably am in favor of more freedom for workers, or in this case, the workers being anesthesiologists, in those sorts of models. But I think our motivation was different, and the beneficiaries were different. So that was just one final point that I would draw with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think if, there's a homogeneity of, employees being all partners in the
Right.
practice, it's a totally different animal. And I 100% agree.
Right. That's the good word, homogeneity. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Scott Vanderleest, president of Bellingham Anesthesia Associates, thank you very much for joining us today on APM Success.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for what you do.
If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.